Hello. Good evening. I'm Marcus Bursick, the chair of the Geology department, and welcome to the fourth installment of our lecture series on Marcellus Shale. I'm just going to say a few words, then I'm going to introduce the speaker, hopefully very rapidly here, because you've all heard him before, and then Greg Sovas will get into his talk. I'm really excited about this one. Actually, I've been excited about all of them because I'm learning a lot. Let me just say thanks, first of all, to everybody who helped with organizing this speaker series, particularly Michael Joy, and Mike and I will go around after with the microphones again as usual. Anyway, so a couple of questions have come up about the podcasts and everything. We're working really hard to get those up. I almost thought they were going to be up this morning, but there was apparently a technical glitch, so we're still not able to get them up. We're going to put up the podcast as well as the slides, and either PowerPoint or PDF format for all the talks. If you didn't register, please do so. It just helps us to know how many people are coming as usual, and to know what kind of folks are interested in the talk series, and it's been really great to see everybody here this each week. So I'm going to introduce Greg in a second. Remember, after Greg gives his talk, we're going to have a brief timeout, a couple of minutes, so that people can stretch and leave who need to leave, and then get the room settled down again, and then we'll have our question period, 45 minutes again, and then some students from the department will have some refreshments for you as you take off for the evening, and please take advantage of those if you need a sugar surge, and talk to our students a little bit. They'd really appreciate that. Again, once we get to the questions, I'll ask the students if they got any questions first, and then we'll ask the general audience for questions. The speaker today is Greg Sovas. He has over 40 years of experience in New York environmental issues. He's currently the president of his own one-person consulting firm, XRM LLC, principal and director of the Lake Country Frack Water Specialists LLC, and is a primary consultant to the Twin Tiers Landowners Coalition, currently helping landowners with leasing issues in Steuben County, New York, and Tioga County, PA. Mr. Sovas worked at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, whatever, for 33 years until he retired in 2001. For the last 22 years at the DEC, he was the director of the Division of Mineral Resources, overseeing the management and regulation of the oil and gas industry and the mining industry in New York. He is the primary author of the 1981 amendments to the New York State Oil, Gas, and Solution Mining Law and the 1991 amendments to the Mined Land Reclamation Law. He holds a bachelor's degree in management engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Massachusetts and a Master of Science in environmental engineering from the University of Massachusetts. Let's all welcome Gregory Sovas.
Let's try the mic. Oh, it works. Everybody hear me okay? Good. Well, I have to tell you, I'm greatly honored to be here tonight. I really am humbled to be asked to participate in this series. I think it's a great series. I think there's a tremendous amount of public information that it's good to see that the citizens want to find out about this resource and find out how the state is going to regulate it, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very, very positive, and I really am humbled to be here tonight. Before we get started with my actual presentation, I'd like to ask a few questions so that I can gauge what the audience knows and what it doesn't know. And the first thing I want to know is how many of you now, and don't look so solemn, by the way, how many of you now get most of your information from the internet and not from the newspapers? Could you raise your hands? Yeah, pretty much all the kids, I knew that. But it's surprising to see some of the others, some of the older people as well. how many in the group, and I'm not going to hold it against you, are opposed to hydrofracking? Okay. And how many have actually read the supplemental generic environmental impact statement of DEC, at least parts of it? Well, that's good. Well, I know you would have anyway. That's good. How many of you know about the casing and cementing guidelines that have been in place in New York since the 1980s? Interesting. Very interesting. How many of you know Darcy's Law? Anybody know Darcy's Law? Very good. Very good. I'm very pleased and surprised. Okay. What I was trying to get at here was to tell people that they need to do their own research. Not listen to the paper, not listen to the internet, not listen to me, although you can make an exception with me. But, you know, it's too easy now, particularly for the younger people, to be influenced by the professor, by me, by the internet. And there are many, many stories, and I'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about the written word. But there's just too much misinformation going out there now. Now, let me say this to you, that I'm a member of IOGA. I'm a member of the PIOGA, which is the Pennsylvania Independent Oil and Gas Association. But my talk is for public information. It's not to espouse a particular point of view, although it's pretty evident when you hear my talk, you'll know what side I'm on. And I have to say that in the last few weeks, I was approached by API to help them with public education efforts and to work with IOGA to kind of coordinate public education efforts. And to their credit, they said, we do not want you lobbying, we want you to provide public information, because they know, like the Independent Oil and Gas Association knows, like everybody else knows, there's not enough public interaction and not enough communication with the public on these kinds of issues. So that's kind of a precursor to what I'm going to talk about today, and I'm not going to go through this again except to say that as part of my responsibilities at DEC, I was the governor's representative to the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission for 20 odd years. I was the governor's representative to the Federal Outer Continental Shelf Policy Committee on the Federal Offshore Leasing Program for 25 years, actually a charter member. So what I'm going to tell you tonight is not just specific to New York, but kind of what I know from everywhere in the country. So that's a little bit different, and you'll see that when we get to that. What we're really going to talk about today is I'm going to take you through the regulatory history in the state, the environmental concerns and mitigations, the GEIS, Generic Environmental Impact Statement process, and then now the Supplemental Generic Environmental Impact Statement process, the SGEIS highlights. Sorry to use the acronyms, but you know, it will be all night if I talk through all this stuff. And the next steps and the timelines. So most of you out in this part of the world know about the oil and gas industry in the state. It's been here since the 1860s. The old oil fields, the old oil fields down in let me see here, here we are, in green down there, and of course gas, which is relatively new. And part of the problem is with the oil and gas industry, with IOGA in particular, and with the public, is that you're familiar with oil and gas, but the people in the Hudson Valley, derogatorily referred to them as the quarter-acre crowd. It was the large landowners in Delaware County, which I found very funny. But those people have never seen oil and gas wells. And it wasn't that long ago that Senator Moynihan on the Senate floor said, well, we don't have any oil and gas in the state. So we've done a pretty poor job of communicating that we have an oil and gas industry in the state. We certainly have done a poor job, and I'm including myself with that, in communicating that the issues that we discussed and resolved 20 and 30 years ago are now coming back again. And so here we are talking about all these same issues again with the people in the Hudson Valley, who, by the way, are outside of the Marcellus. This is one of the puzzling things that really puzzles me. I did this presentation, or I did a presentation to a law firm in Syracuse a couple of years before the election. I said, you know, it doesn't matter who gets elected, because we've got a very serious problem. And our politicians don't seem to put two and two together. They don't seem to understand that we need a stable supply, irrespective of the need for national security. They don't put together the need for a stable supply of natural gas and oil and energy toward our economy. So our candidates, none of our candidates are versed in energy. And why is this? This happens continually. Think about it. We've been fooling around with Project Independence since 1973 under Richard Nixon, and we haven't gotten any further since that date. It's the same thing over and over again. And what happened right before the election, of course, is that if you remember, it was $170 for oil in about 2006, 2007. Then the price dropped, then everybody forgot about it, and then we went on our way. And we seem to do this all the time. Now, the good news is that the American people are kind of catching on, and they're not saying, uh-oh, we're paying $4 a gallon for gasoline. We ought to investigate the oil companies. They've made the connection now that if something happens in Libya, it affects us. And that's new. That really is new. We've always looked at the oil and gas guys and the oil and gas guys as being the problem, but in fact, we don't control the price of oil. And by the way, Obama still hasn't got religion on natural gas. He's talked about clean, renewable energy and whatever, and he's standing in Pittsburgh with 44,000 jobs out the window and doesn't even say, hello, you could take credit for all this, and he still hasn't embraced natural gas. So, the Marcellus, wow, 500 trillion cubic feet of gas, environmentally preferable fuel. There's been tremendous technological advances to hydrofrack these shales and horizontal fracks that weren't available. Near population centers in depressed areas of the state in New York, Pennsylvania, you couldn't have placed this deposit in a better place in the whole country than in New York and Pennsylvania. It truly is an international game changer. And I'm just going to go through these quickly because you've seen these maps before in the GEIS the SGIS, which as you've all read. You see that it stretches from New York to West Virginia. The latest number is 500 trillion cubic feet. We consume about 23 trillion cubic feet annually. It's a tremendous, tremendous resource, and it's going to be here 50, 100 years, maybe 150 years. And as we advance technology, even more. Now, I tried to put together a slide which showed the relative advancement and investment in Pennsylvania versus the relative advancement and investment in New York. So it's a little complicated, this next slide, but I think you'll understand. Actually, I skipped a slide. So this is the Marcellus. This is the Marcellus Fairway. And we're not even talking about the Utica, which is deeper than the Marcellus, but this is where it is. So now the next slide is the one that I screwed up. And you know, this isn't too far from the truth. This isn't too far from the truth. Pennsylvania is drilling their brains out. 44,000 jobs last year, 88,000 jobs. It's come at a price. It's come at a big price. There's trucks everywhere. But there's tremendous amount, it has changed the landscape, there's no question about it. But there is a tremendous amount, there's billions of dollars going to the economy, millions of dollars. You know, I work for a company called Glen O. Hawbaker in New York, who is asphalt and a sand and gravel and construction aggregate for the oil and gas guys. So I do their permitting work in New York. They have 100 vacancies of people. They need 100 people, and they're not alone. They need all kinds of people in Pennsylvania and New York. So why are we so different from Pennsylvania? Well, we have a different regulatory scheme under SEQR, which is the State Environmental Quality Review Act. we want all our conditions in place and all our regulations in place before proceeding. Pennsylvania started and just keeps going, and then when they have a problem, they go back and they try to fix it. We have a formidable array of conflicting people, ideas, environmental groups, geographic differences, whole bunch of different problems. The media here in New York is not informed, and it says responsible. I meant not responsible. I didn't want to put irresponsible because I felt that was a little strong. And finally, our division, DMN is Division of Mineral Resources at DEC. That's the group that I was in charge of, and I'm going to go through that history as well. They don't have enough people to do this job. Did I skip through? No, okay. So let's go back to 1981. And 1981 was when the oil, gas, and solution mining law was passed, really modernized the way in which we permitted oil and gas wells in the state. And before that time, if you were in an old oil field, you didn't even need a permit from the state. You wrote what was called a notice of intention. We're going to drill a well over here. They send it into DC. Have a nice day. So in 1981, this statute, which I worked hard on, it's really developed as a groundwater protection program. And it requires permits for any wells drilled in the state. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff we won't get into. But it had fees for new staff, and it superseded all local regulation with the exception of taxation and local roads. And at the time, there was no IOGA. And so IOGA, I've always taken credit for being one of the founding fathers of IOGA. They didn't like that. They thought I was a tight-ass bureaucrat. So, we had our issues with IOGA. But now that I've moved to the dark side, and now that I'm a member of IOGA, they're okay with me. But we had a lot of issues and a lot of contentious issues those days. We got through it. It never became personal, and we worked together. And I think for the betterment of the environment in New York and for the betterment of the state. The Division of Mineral Resources was established in 1982 and 83, and I had the opportunity because, and I want to go through the civil service system for you. That'll be another 5 or 6 hours. But the fact of the matter is that we had to establish new civil service positions, so I was able to do a national recruitment of staff. And in doing so, then I had to bring people, so I had to bring them and their families across the country. Of course, the state pays none of that, none of their moving expenses or anything. And then when they got here, they had to work for a year and a half, and then they had to pass an exam, and then they had to be number 1, 2, or 3 on the list to stay in the state. So it was a difficult time for a lot of people. But we paid a lot less than they did in industry, and the industry people were laughing at us until the bottom hit a few years later, and then they were begging us for jobs. But most of the staff, the point of this thing is that these are some really, really top-notch people. Brad Field is my successor. Kathy Sanford is the assistant director at DEC. They all came out of industry, came from California, New Mexico. We brought people in. All of them pretty much had ties to New York. And even before affirmative action, this was well before affirmative action, we ended up with 40% women and minorities. Sadly, because we could get better qualified women for the lower price. But they are very highly responsive and highly professional. And what do they do? Well, there's a whole list of things that the Division of Mineral Resources does. And there are 2 major programs, the mining program, the Mine Land Reclamation Program, and the Oil and Gas Program. And the Oil and Gas Program includes leasing of state lands, regulation of gas storage, a whole bunch of things. But when we look at an application, by the way, I use a schizophrenic we now, back to my old days, so it's a dual personality thing that I have. When we look at an application, the first thing you look at is the casing and cementing program to make sure that the well has integrity and it's cased and cemented so that you protect the fresh water. That's the point of the oil and gas program. That is the central issue. And then we do an environmental site review. We actually send somebody to the site to make sure what he put on the application is what we see in the field, make sure there are no other permits. It's a 24-hour, 7 days a week inspection, quite different from a lot of positions at DEC. I have been called on New Year's Eve. I have been called on Christmas Eve for a well fire, all kinds of different things. But these guys are out there all the time. They're expected to be out there. And of course, it's a big safety problem as well. So you have to make sure. Luckily, we've never had anybody killed. Luckily, we've never had any hint of scandal of anybody taking any money or anything over all these years. So I'm pretty proud of all that. And one of the things that happened in 1981 was that right after we passed the legislation, the president of IOGA says to me, now it's your job, weed out the bad actors. And you know, he was right, because there were some bad actors in there, and this was before the tax laws were changed in 1986. So every dentist, everybody was out there drilling wells and writing it all off on their taxes. Even they didn't care whether it made money or not. They were getting the money back in taxes. So we ended up assessing a lot of fines during that period. But the point is that like your own kids, you have to set expectations. You have to communicate. If you're a regulator, you have to communicate the expectation to the regulated community. This is what we want. This is how we want it. This is the way to do it. This is how we want it done. And if you work with them, hey, this is not right. We need you to fix this. We'll be back next week. You come back in a week, it's fixed. What do we care about a fine or penalty? We got the environment cleaned up. We saved time instead of going to a hearing and all that. And a fine doesn't do much for you. And the next time, and by the way, the other thing with the oil and gas industry is they need to come back and see you for a new permit. So if they didn't do what we wanted, I say, hey, boys, I'm not going to give you a permit till you clean this up. Legal? Probably not. Effective? Very effective. So pretty soon they got to understand what it is we needed, and we really had a very good cooperative relationship with them. Now, casing and cementing, this is what I started with. In the 1980s, the good thing about what you need to know is what you don't know. So we didn't know everything at the state, we really didn't. And so we said, okay, industry, come in here and tell us how to protect the fresh water of the state of New York. So we sat around the table and we had some pretty good knockdown, drag-out fights, and we came up with these conditions. Redundant protection for pipe, two strings of pipe in a well, and those conditions have basically been unchanged, relatively unchanged for 30 years. Now, I want to emphasize this point. No well has impacted the groundwater since at least the 1980s in the state of New York. Zero. This little asterisk here, that's just because, for full disclosure purposes, I have to tell you that I made a presentation to Business Council in 2009 with Brad Field, my successor. And I said the same thing, and Brad says to me, you're wrong about that. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, we did have a well that had a casing problem, and we fixed it in 36 hours in 1996. And I said, okay. So I'm telling you that because it happened, but it was so minor that I didn't even remember it after all these years. So remember this. No well has impacted groundwater since 1980s. Zero. Zero. This is a diagram. You've seen it at DEC, and you've seen it on the website. And basically, it's the same thing that I just talked about. The two strings of pipe. What you're looking at is the water, cement, pipe, well bore. Every well is drilled this way in the state of New York. Unlike Pennsylvania, which just in December matched what we've had for 30 years. Well, since 1980. I don't know, my math is, John Hochul says I can't subtract anymore. So, but since the 1980s, we've had these conditions, and they've they've proved us, I shouldn't say proved us, the industry and us together worked this out, and it's proved to be, it's worked. And the same thing with aquifer conditions. In this case, there are 3 strings of pipe and cement. Whoops. Gotta watch that. Sorry. Hey. Okay. And these were developed with industry input and a hearing that we had in Jamestown, which eventually ended. The 3 strings of pipe. The other thing is that DEC is on site for the drilling of any well through a principal or secondary aquifer. It witnesses the cement coming back to the surface, meaning that the cement has come up and the seal is good in those wells. And Jamestown sued us in 1984, and their own consultant, Moody & Associates, did a study and found that we had the most stringent aquifer conditions in the nation, or at least as stringent as anyone else's in the nation. So that worked. Now, the State Environmental Quality Review Act was what I referred to, that first thing about seeker. And what happened, that passed in the late 1970s, and they turned to the division and said, okay, how are you going to comply with seeker now? You've got to look at your program and tell me how you're going to comply with the State Environmental Quality Review Act. And we looked at all kinds of things because the seeker is really, it's a way to plan a project, but it's really a project-specific thing. So, for example, a shopping center. Okay, you look at the shopping center, you assess the environmental impact, give it a permit, see you later. On the oil and gas side, you drill a well, then you might drill another well, or if the first one's bad, you won't drill a second well, or you might drill 50 wells. And so we had to find a way to make this fit under seeker, and we decided to embark on what's called a generic environmental impact statement in 1988, which is a way of looking at, and by the way, the final GEIS is 1992, of which I was the signator to. And the generic environmental impact statement really just looks at like things, categorizes like things. If you drill a well this way and it's consistent with these conditions, whatever, then it's going to be either significant or non-significant under seeker. Significant meaning it requires an EIS, an environmental impact statement. A non-significant meaning you can get your permit and off you go. So we went through public review hearings over 4 years. We established these thresholds. It really is a terrific public information document. I know it was used at the University of Buffalo here for an environmental policy course, and it is a binding legal document. So it insulated the oil and gas companies from frivolous lawsuits on any wells drilled. And the 1992 findings basically said, okay, a project is a well, the drilling of a well. And as I said, if it's drilled consistent with the casing and cementing guidelines, and it's drilled consistent with aquifer conditions, or it's drilled consistent with whatever wildcat conditions for a well that's outside of a known area, and there are no other DEC permits issued, here you go. So we've already assessed, evaluated the impacts up front. What may be significant are some other things like interstate parkland in an ag district over 2.5 acres, et cetera, et cetera. And this really establishes a list of thresholds within that finding statement within the 1992 GEIS that allowed the department allowed the division to go ahead and issue permits consistent with already evaluating the impacts for those kinds of vanilla wells, if you want to call it that. Now, the oil and gas industry, whether you believe it or not, the oil and gas industry is probably our most technically advanced industry that we have in the United States. The only exception might be the computer industry. They are the second largest users of computers in the United States after the computer industry. And what they do is, if you really think about it, what they can do is really phenomenal. They can drill a mile down, straight down. They can drill a mile over and hit a marble. Okay? They can do that. And in the late 80s, I had the chance to go through the Shell research labs in Houston. They usually don't allow people, but we were the governor's representatives at the Outer Continental Shelf meeting there, and they allowed us to go through and tour the plant. And what we saw in there were basically 4 different things, one of which was reservoir simulation that you see here, one of which was GIS systems, but this was 10 years before GIS systems became available in the United States, before we ever saw another GIS system. So these companies are advancing technology like you can't believe. They are, and I dare say this because I know some people aren't going to believe it. Everybody hates the oil and gas industry. They have a terrific environmental record. And their offshore record is even, with the exception of the BP spill, which is a tragic, tragic accident that somebody has to pay for. You can't think of the last time we had a problem in the United States waters, in the offshore. Hasn't happened. The Exxon Valdez was a tanker spill. It had nothing to do with offshore drilling. Yet we've locked up all the acreage around the country because we're afraid of oil spills. So they have come up now from 1992 to today, and in the late 90s and into 2004, they found a way to drill these horizontal wells and to hydrofrack these dense shales, which make these dense shales economic. Never thought they'd be able to do that. I want to talk about spacing of wells just for a minute because it's important to the concepts of oil and gas. Spacing is just the size in acre. Most of you people know this because you're from this area of the state, but a lot of people, other people don't. It's just the size in acres to effectively drain the resource. In other words, 40 acres are assigned to Medina well because that's what a Medina well can drain. It's based on conservation and preventing waste. And these concepts come out of our original oil and gas, New York oil and gas law in 1963, I believe, or 64, I think it was 63, which is really based on Texas and Oklahoma law through the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, which did a bunch of model laws. So we have things like you cannot drain your neighbor's property, protection of correlative rights. We have the drilling plan. In other words, you can't leave out a piece, leave it, it's called stranded acreage. In Pennsylvania, they have what's called the law of capture. We have a modified law of capture. Law of capture meaning there's no Marcellus spacing for wells in Pennsylvania, right over the border. And they can drain, and I have Tioga County landowners, Tioga County, PA landowners, and we're caught because we can be drained. They don't have a fair pooling statute. So somebody, an oil and gas company can say, hey, you don't join this unit, you're out, pal. We're just going to drain you and see you later. And that's exactly what is happening down there. So don't think, New York is thinking all the time and thinking ahead and doing the right thing. It may take a little longer than we want, but they're thinking ahead. And the reason why spacing, this is how spacing came about. This is Spindletop in Texas, and somebody found oil, and then somebody put a well next to it, and then next to it, and next to it, and that's what you got. And so they said, hey, we got to do something about this. So the Texas Railroad Commission, I believe it was a Railroad Commission at the time, then decided to go to spacing and unitization, and that became really the modern day law. Now, in 2000, actually in the Trenton Black River Formation, that's another formation in the state where there were large fault zones which didn't need hydrofracking, but basically the spacing was odd-shaped and it required hearings. And so what was happening is the department was going to hearings all the time, and they were very contentious meetings about contentious hearings on compulsory unitization and integration, meaning having to pool everybody into specific, why am I in this pool, why am I not in this pool, et cetera, et cetera. And the result of that was the landowners weren't getting paid because the money was in escrow. So the department and the industry, and I had nothing to do with this is excellent law. They came together and they said, well, we need to set out the options for how somebody can participate in the well in case they want to be a part owner in the well. that's drilled on the property, and we need to space these wells, space them by depth and formation. And so they did that in 2005, and in the process they also they spaced all the formations, and they spaced the shales, not really thinking about and knowing about the Marcellus shales coming down the road. And then in 2008, they said, uh-oh, now we got the same problem with horizontal wells, or now we have the same problem with the horizontal wells that we did with spacing in the Trenton Black River. So they said, let's decide how to space horizontal wells. And so that's what they did in this 2008 legislation. No well bore can be less than 330 feet from any unit boundary. So if you imagine this, now they've said, okay, the Marcellus well can be 36 to 48 acres in a square, or if it's drilled this way, drilled vertically and then horizontally, now the spacing unit is going to look like a rectangle because it's going to be 330 feet on all sides. This was very smart, very smart. Unfortunately, we haven't drilled many Marcellus wells, but it was very smart to do this in advance. So, but in the governor's 2008 message, he said, uh-oh, well, I'm going to sign the legislation for this, but we got to do a supplemental GEIS because we never talked about horizontal wells in the 1992 thing, and we never really assessed some of these other things. So he said, okay, we're going to complement the 1992 GEIS, Generic Environmental Impact Statement, with a SGEIS, which is the Supplemental Generic Environmental Impact Statement, for impacts not evaluated. And this really is the correct approach to comply with SEQR and to, again, insulate the department and the industry from lawsuits. So, what has changed in the Marcellus? Well, we know, and I'll talk about this a little more, scope of operations changed, water supply for frac operations, much more water is needed, frac water recycling and disposal, logistics of storing and moving water, overall development of the resource, impacts to municipalities, tearing up the roads, much more traffic. These are all the issues that are being addressed in the Supplemental Generic Environmental Impact Statement. And where in the Generic Environmental Impact Statement, a typical well was 80,000 gallons of water, now we're talking about 4 million or 5 million gallons of water for a 4-stage frac. Think about this. They can frac out and then close off. They're going to frac the last part of the lateral. Then they're going to block that off. Then they're going to frac it. Then they're going to frac it again. Then they're going to frac it again. And companies now, like Range, are experimenting with even much, much longer laterals. So the technology is evolving even as we speak. Frac fluids, the flow back coming back out of the well is 10 to 15%. So that water, they put in 1 million, comes back 100,000, 150,000. You got to treat that. You got to add 850,000 gallons to that. Fresh water, do it again for the second stage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got a whole bunch of different things that weren't evaluated. And of course, the duration, if you have a pad, part of the legislation said if you want a 640-acre pad, you're going to have to commit to drilling all those wells within 3 years. So the duration really for the initial GEIS was 6 weeks. Now you're talking about something that might last as long as 3 years. And increased truck traffic, of course, is inevitable because if you're bringing in water at 6,000 gallons per truck and you need 1 million gallons, you're talking about a lot of trucks. Or a pipeline or something else, but you get the point. It's much different than what was evaluated. So the SGIS process, well, they did an excellent scoping document with public hearings in 2008. They released a draft supplemental generic environmental impact statement in September 2009. They had public hearings and comment. Comment period closed December 2009. And the ultimate step is what you saw in the 1992, the finding statement that I talked about. That's the ultimate step, and that's what's left. And the water and groundwater issues, supply I talked about, new gas migration. Of course, these are some of the concerns that come out of the water and the groundwater issues. The impact of hydrofracking on groundwater, surface spill containment, hydrofrack recycling, transport issues. This is just a brief list. And we know, for example, that water usage isn't a big deal. Even though it sounds big, it's, if you look at the golf courses are almost 10 times as much, use almost 10 times as much water as the Marcellus. Now, that doesn't mean you take water from a stream, a blue ribbon trout stream in the middle of summer. But the fact of the matter is we are blessed in this state with tremendous resources of water. And this water is regulated by the Delaware River Basins Commission, Susquehanna River Basins Commission, and now I see the DEC wants to get in the act as well. And disposal options, well, there are some options, sewage treatment plants, deep well disposal that probably won't occur here in New York because of our formations, although you could make a case for the Trenton Black River being able to take some fluids, distillation, reverse osmosis, landfills, and new technologies. And everybody is scrambling in Pennsylvania to, I don't know if you've been reading the papers, but there's all kinds of things happening there with them as well. There is a movement towards recycling reuse, which is the right way to go. And I think companies are coming to that conclusion as well as the state reduces transport costs, lessens pressure on treatment plants, and creating non-hazardous waste products from the frac flowback is really the way to go. Now, in the full disclosure mode, this is the company that I'm associated with. I'm the principal and a director of that Lake Country Frac Water Specialist. We treat flowback water for recycling, and we know that it's more efficient to do it on-site than it is to take it off-site. So whether you use our system or you use another system out there, and by the way, we're just starting, but if you use another system out there, as long as you do it on-site, and you talk about that 150,000 gallons, I said comes back to 10 to 15%. If you applied an on-site system in Pennsylvania, for example, for all their wells, you save 200,000 truck trips per year. So it's not insignificant. So mobile processing we believe is the way to go. We can convert metals to inert product, potentially beneficial use for barium sulfate, which is the weighting agent for a mud. So there are all kinds of companies that are dealing with these kinds of issues, trying to find a way through the regulatory work at the regulatory standards and things that are happening in Pennsylvania. And likely, I had a couple of slides here on the EPA study, but the EPA study, in my opinion, on hydrofracking, they're not going to find anything. So what they're really going to do is they're going to latch onto the disclosure issue, which is a good thing. I think everybody agrees that the frac additives should be disclosed. That's going to happen. And secondly, they're probably going to deal with pretreatment standards for water that goes to the treatment plant, whether it's barium, whether it's strontium, whether it's, you've seen now, bromides in the water, all these kinds of things. Probably EPA is not happy with the way in which Pennsylvania has handled their waste. Let's put it that way. Hydraulic fracturing is not new. It's been going on since 1900s. Our first Medina sandstone in the 60s. So, and the Barnett, which is the same shale kind of formation in Texas, over 11,000 wells have been drilled in the Barnett, and they've all been fracked. This is not new technology, and the SGIS is not about hydrofracking. It's about the impacts of the water and the other issues surrounding hydrofracking, but it's not on the actual issue of hydrofracking itself. And these you've probably seen these around, but more than 1 million wells have been drilled in hydrofrac since the 1940s. The governmental organizations never raised any issues. Remember I said I was with the IOGCC? If you look at the SGEIS and you looked at Appendix 15, you'll see a number of letters from state agencies. No one in all the years that I was there ever raised an issue with hydrofracking that had any impact on the fresh water or groundwater of any state. Zero. And there's nothing new in the shale hydrofrack except more water and more chemicals. And you've seen this. This comes from the 1992 GEIS and probably, I think it's in the SGIS. There's no record of any documented instance of groundwater contamination caused by hydraulic fracturing for gas well development in New York, despite the use of this technology, in thousands of wells across the state during the past 50 or more years. So, if you believe what I told you, we have, and you should, by the way, because, I'm the man. If you believe, I'm kidding. If you believe what I told you, we haven't had a problem with casing and cementing since at least the 1980s. Hasn't happened in this state. Horizontal drilling, we didn't really talk about this, but horizontal drilling is really no different than vertical. It's just that it hits more, or the formation, which is what you want to occur. But it's not environmentally any different. Water supply is manageable, and this, of course, needs some resolution. The options for disposal and recycling and reuse. So this is the Cliff Notes version of the SGEI, the draft Supplemental Generic Environmental Impact Statement. If you don't want to read the whole 806 pages, here's what you ought to read. Chapter 4, Geology. Alpha Geoscience did a great job on a lot of the graphics that you saw, the two graphics I showed you. But there are some other terrific graphics in there. Pretty easy reading. Chapter 5 on natural gas development activities and high volume hydrofracking. There are a lot of things hidden in the appendices. So the appendices actually have much more substantive stuff than the actual discussion in the document. So don't dismiss I talked about 15, I think 13, Appendix 13 talks about how fluids in the hydrofracked fluids in the lateral can't possibly go in the vertical against the laws of gravity and against Darcy's law and some other laws. It goes through all that. So it's a pretty good explanation. It's pretty technical, but it's a pretty good explanation. And if you read the conclusions, I think you can get the gist of it. But, so Appendix 6 and Appendix 10 are the proposed supplemental conditions. And Appendix 6 really is the EAF, the environmental assessment form that has to accompany every application. And that has all kinds of, we're talking about the kitchen sink here now. That has all kinds of specifics on hydrofracking, the additives. They're going to have to disclose what the additives are now. If they want to drill in New York, that's going to happen. So that issue is off the table. Water source detail, where's your water going to come from? You've got to find all the water wells in the area and document that. You can only use tanks for hydrofrac flowback, not putting them in pits. You could put it in a pit, but they've made it so difficult to get a permit and construction that it's going to be difficult. You have to have a proposed fluid disposal plan, visual noise mitigation plan. You have to have a greenhouse emissions plan. How are you going to stop that? So, there's a lot of stuff in there that I think it's a me too. What's happened here is that this thing is degenerated in the department to say, well, what about this issue? Okay, we'll throw it in there. What about this? Okay, we'll throw it in there. So when you've got to do a greenhouse emissions plan here to get a permit to drill a well, I think that's a little overkill as far as I'm concerned. And then you have to have a road use agreement with the town to make sure that you don't rip up the roads, and if you rip up the roads, you're going to pay for them. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, they're rebuilding all the roads in Pennsylvania. The roads in Pennsylvania are not like the roads in New York in the first place, let me tell you. And they've gotten to the point now where they write a blank check to the paving company, say, go fix the road before we even use it. Go put in a new road. So people are pretty happy down there with the new. Yes, there's a tremendous amount of angst about the truck traffic and all the other things that are happening down there, but the fact of the matter is all the roads are being rebuilt at the industry expense. And what's in the draft supplemental conditions? Well, again, I'm just giving you a few of these now. There's a lot of stuff in these two appendices, so take a look at them, 6 and 10. Local coordination mandates local coordination and planning, water well testing and ongoing monitoring of all the wells in the area. This is actually water well test. Now we're talking about a program to monitor all the wells in the area. That's a good thing, I think. It's expensive, but it's a good thing. Stormwater permits required all kinds of pit specifications of size and liner, additional requirements for cementing and hydrofracking if you're going to put in an intermediate string or another pipe in the hole, and how you're going to do that. And then this issue, norm testing, naturally occurring radioactive materials. You're going to have to do, it's already in there, a lot of testing. I expect that there's going to be more come out of that, more come out of the next draft. And that has to do with accumulation of solids and things which may have a higher radiologic content. We never found, there were 2 studies that were done, one in the early 90s, I believe, when I was there, and we never found anything beyond background. And then DEC did another study in 2008, 2009 for the Marcellus, and they didn't find anything. And when we did a demonstration in Pennsylvania, we didn't find anything either. You know, DEP was right there monitoring the norm, and they didn't find anything. So I think this is something that's going to get results. It's a manageable issue. Let's put it that way. It's more of a worker safety issue, in my opinion, and a disposal issue than it is really a health and safety issue. I don't know if you saw the rebuttals from DEP about the New York Times articles, but they pretty much dismissed all of the New York Times allegations about high levels of radioactive materials that were discharged into the rivers. Unfortunately, those don't seem to get the play that the original things like the New York Times do. So, timeline for completion of the SGAS, which is, well, I'll say not really. This is Pete Granis, who is a former commissioner. He actually, before my wife was, he was at the department, and my wife was at the department. We were not married at the time, but he took her out for drinks. So the only thing I'll say about it, I guess, is that he's got good taste in women. So I will leave it at that. But he said, okay, it's going to be in the beginning of the end of 2009. He said, oh, it'll be late summer, early fall, end of 2010. Companies will receive their permits in 2011. Well, that didn't happen. And then DEC did something kind of unprecedented in April of 2010, and not everybody knows this. They made a major information request to the industry and asked them for a whole bunch of information. 6 pages of stuff, and the industry complied with that request sometime in July or so, sometime over the summer. I did not see the response. And I'm told that they did some additional research in the fall or so, under contract to some other people for some additional research. So there was some significant new information. Now, there was a bill, if you recall, back in December to stop hydrofracking in the state, which would have had devastating consequences on companies like Norris Energy, who are drilling vertical wells and hydrofracking these wells now. And the long and short of it is the governor vetoed the bill, but then he said, okay, he put out a message, really an executive order is what it ended up being. You got to complete the draft SGAS on or around June 2011, public comment again for 30 days, and if you're going to have a hearing, you're going to have one in New York City. What the hell do we have to have a hearing in New York City if there's no Marcellus in New York City? You have the hearings where the activity is occurring. So the translation of this, and by the way, this is kind of in the strange but true category. I was looking for something to put for Vito. So I used Google Images, and I put in Vito, and up comes his picture. And you know, I put in hydrofracking, and assembly and Speaker Sheldon Silver came up. Number one. How can that be? I mean, talk about strange but true. So, the executive, if you know Seeker and you know the time frames in Seeker, you've got to be able, you can interpret. And I told the industry this way back when, and I said, hey, you know, what they're talking about is, if they're talking about public notice, that means that the final GEIS is going to be September 2011 at the earliest. Why mention New York City in public hearings if you're not going to have a public hearing? And then public hearings are going to mean at least 2012 at the earliest. So we're now into 2012 for the earliest, and the commissioner and the new governor came in, presumably blessed the executive order because he didn't rescind it. And in my opinion, he probably knew all about, Patterson probably talked to Cuomo about this before issuing that executive order in the first place. That's my opinion. So the next GIS steps, they've got 13,000 comments to consider, and this additional information request, and of course the governor's veto message sets the stage. Against this backdrop, we have and I used the Times Union, but I could have put anybody in here. What's happened to our print media? Print media is losing subscribers because of all the young people and some of the others I saw, like Stu Lowenstein goes to the internet now instead of, it's too cheap to buy a paper. So you've got these people who, it used to be that the print media would never print anything until they heard the other side. And then they printed it. The New York Times would never print a story that was inaccurate if they checked it out. They would always check out a story and then print it. Now, whether they don't have the people, whether they don't want to do this anymore, whether the investigative reporters are gone, they're no different than the internet. Anybody can get anything printed. And this trash that gets printed without any discussion, and I kind of gave it to I had a presentation to the New York Press Association a week or so ago. I said, I kind of said in a nice way, what the hell is wrong with you people? Here's the people to call. Call me, call IOGA, call their PR people. Check it, they'll help you out. They'll answer the question. They'll tell you what's right and what's wrong, and then you can print it. You can print what you want. But they're no different than the internet now, and it's really unfortunate because they're doing a disservice to everybody, and anybody can print anything. And so what we've got here is what I call the circle of pressure and the little division of mineral resources in the middle. They don't have enough people, and they're getting bombarded by the landowners who want this to move, particularly in the southern tier landowners, of which I'm sure that we have many in the room here. Business interests and the gas industry. On this side, we've got the environmental groups, particularly in the Hudson Valley in New York City. The new Governor Cuomo, who's kind of taking a hands off, at least until he's got the budget straightened out. And the legislature, who is seems to be a puppet of the environmental groups. I don't know, they aren't listening either. And we're being controlled, you know, by the New York City, Long Island legislature for issues that are upstate, for environmental issues. The southern tier, you know, I mean, I've worked with the people, with the assemblymen, the senators in the southern tier for years and years. You should be so proud of them. They are terrific, terrific people, from Danny Walsh back in 1980 to Jess Present to, I'm sure I'm going to leave out people, Pat McGee to, I mean, every one of these people they never ever asked me for anything that wasn't above board and wasn't, they always wanted to hear both sides of the issue, and then they always did the right thing. They always supported the division of mineral resources. And the sad part about it is that the southern tier is just doesn't have any sway in the legislature. So why do I call this as the debate clash? What's happened is this whole technical scientific argument, oil and gas industry has the answers, it's done safe everywhere, economic development, jobs, producing clean burning natural gas. It's now evolved into a social philosophical debate about no drilling is good, don't like it, but I can't find a substantial technical reason to be against it. They hate the oil and gas industry, and you know, this is unfortunate, but this is of their own doing. And this goes all the way back to big oil. They just haven't stepped up to the plate early enough. And you know, years ago, when I take a state trip, when I go down to Texas, you'd see ads in the TV ads and everything about how they're producing natural gas and doing all that. And it becomes part of the community. And here they're just starting to do that now, 20, 30 years later. And really, they're behind the 8 ball, way behind the curve on this thing. And it's become an exploitation of Mother Earth. And this whole hydrofracking issue has become a lightning rod, which never ceases to amaze me. So Joe Martens, he's a good guy. He's a very good guy. He's a terrific, I've worked with him in the governor's office. He's a commissioner. He's a great choice for commissioner. I worked with his wife. She was an attorney at DEC. He needs to get religion, but he's a good guy, and he needs to learn. But he said, as late as the 31st, draft SGS, well, we don't need to get it out on June 1st. That was kind of a guideline. We'll get it out sometime this summer. And it's probably going to only be in the new information, but we're not exactly sure. And we're not exactly sure how long we're going to have the comment period undecided. And my view is public hearings are possible. He kind of said something like that. But my view is that it's very likely we're going to have public hearings. I don't see how they're going to avoid public hearings. What we haven't talked about are the positive aspects of Marcellus development. And this is one of the things that gets lost in this discussion. And the positive aspects are you don't have to drill the well on top of a pinnacle reef. You can drill a well because it's a blanket formation, a shale, you know, that's essentially uniform. Well, I shouldn't say uniform, but it's homogeneous through a formation. You know, the geologists, you know better than me. You know, don't laugh at me now. I'm not a geologist, and I know about this much about geology. So, but the fact of the matter is that they can, instead of having, let's take 640 acres. Instead of drilling one well every 40 acres, that's 16 wells per 640 acres. This way they can drain, this way they can drain that area with a 4 to 5 acre drilling pad. So you've only disturbed 4 or 5 acres instead of 16 wells times, let's say, 2 acres, 32 acres. And you don't have wells all over the place, and they're horizontal for greater resource recovery, and it's a smaller footprint, and the landowner can say pretty much, well, I really don't want it over here, let's put it over here. You can't do that with a reef where it has to go right over a vertical well, which has to go right over that. So it's a much better way of being able to develop the resource. And it's a much more environmentally preferable to do it, to have everything consolidated in one area. Have your pits, your ponds, everything right there. 4 to 5 acres, the road, use whatever road. It could be alongside an existing farm road. And if you talk to any farmer, he'll tell you what he doesn't want is something in the middle of his property that has to go around. He wants to be able to plow those rows straight as a die and not be disturbed whatsoever in terms of having to deviate. So the SGEIS process shouldn't overwhelm decision making. And what we need is leadership. We need this thing to move. And whether that leadership is going to come from Joe Martens, the commissioner, or the governor himself, that's got to happen. This has got to progress to conclusion. New York needs to capture the benefits immediately and hope that the gas companies come back. You know, they may not come back. They may say, to hell with you. If you don't want us here, we're going to go someplace else. We're going to stay in Pennsylvania. And we aren't going to see, by the way, the impact that Pennsylvania has, because we have maybe 30% of the resource, and Pennsylvania has something like 70%. If you look at it from a purely acreage basis. So the final SGIS is an environmental textbook, a technical regulatory guidance document for industry. It will be a terrific public information document, already is. It will be a legal regulatory framework for development to proceed, and it will provide the industry with insulation from lawsuits, which is a good thing for everybody. Nobody wants lawsuits. Nobody wants to be delayed. Nobody wants to make a lawyer rich. So what I've told you really is that here I am defending a near-perfect record for the Division of Mineral Resources, and I've done this. I've had really two goals. I've been doing this since 2009, all over the place, including in Buffalo. And my two goals are, one is defending the Division of Mineral Resources, and two, trying to get the companies to stay here in the state so that our landowners can benefit. And we have had no impact to groundwater from drilling, no impact from aquifers, no impact to groundwater from hydrofracking, no lawsuit on any well since 1984, and yet Marcellus development is still stalled. Think about that. We've got a near-perfect record, and we're still stalled. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. It's just that it's taking too long. It's taking way too long. I said this, Marcellus natural gas development, I said this at the Business Council meeting in 2009, may be the greatest economic development opportunity in depressed areas of the state that we will see in our generation. We're not talking about any environmental compromises. Zero. Zero. Nobody's going to drill in this state and take advantage of our environment. It isn't going to happen. It hasn't happened, and it will not happen. Believe me, I spent many sleepless nights over these issues, and we never let anybody walk away from their liability in the state. Never. And we're going to be producing clean-burning natural gas. It may take us 50, 100, 150 years, a stable supply of gas in our backyard. Our domestic production. Think about this. This is unheralded. This means that businesses can come in and locate in New York now because they'll have a stable supply of natural gas, a clean-burning fuel. And most of all, nobody seems to pay attention to this, which really bothers me. And I get a little emotional about this. Nobody cares about the landowners, and they should share in the wealth. People in Pennsylvania are getting rich, and our people that can't pay their taxes. That's it.
Thank you very much, Greg. Let's take our 2 or 3 minute break and stretch, and people who need to leave can leave, and then we'll come back and have questions from students first and then questions from the general audience. Thank you.